I'm Martin Green, and this is the third of my video demos that accompany the tutorial on my website at www.fontstuff.com. And the tutorial shows you how to build a pop-up calendar for Excel. Now, if you've been following these tutorials, you'll know that I've already built the calendar and done some of the coding, and I've written a macro to open the calendar. When the calendar appears, the user can choose a year and a month and a date, and when they choose the date, that gets written into the active cell or into all the selected cells if more than one is selected, and then closes. I want to make some enhancements to the calendar. So, for example, if, as is the case here, the active cell already contains a date, when the calendar opens, I want it to synchronize with the date that's in the active cell, which it doesn't at the moment. The default is for the calendar to open showing today's date. So I'm recording this on the 26th of September, and as you can see, that's what's showing in the calendar, despite the fact that the 11th of November 2014 is showing in the active cell. So I need to write some code. So I'm going to close the calendar and go to the Visual Basic Editor. I need to get into the code module that's attached to the user form that the calendar is on. Quickest way to do that is to right click on the user form over here and choose View Code. So now I'm in the code module for the user form, and I need to create an event procedure for the initialize event of the user form. The initialize event happens when the user form opens and we use it to prepare the form for use. For example, we might be putting default values into text boxes or building lists for drop-down lists and list boxes and that sort of thing. So the way that I get to that event procedure is by picking from the left-hand list here user form. Now, as soon as I do that, it creates an empty event procedure for the click event of the user form. Well, I don't need that, I want a different one, so I'm dropping the right-hand list. Now that right-hand drop-down shows all the relevant event handlers for the item that I've chosen in the left-hand list, and the one that I want is the initialize event, so I'll choose that. Now I can get rid of the one that it gave me, which was user form. Click, and I've got the initialize event, and I'm going to write my code here. What I want the code to do is to decide whether or not the active cell contains a date, and if it does, to synchronize that date with the calendar. So I need an if statement to do that, and I'm going to use the isDate function, and that function is going to look at the value of the active cell. Now, you might expect me to write equals true here, but if you don't write equals true, then that is the default value, so you can leave it as it is. So I'll just continue the if statement. Then the me keyword, remember, refers to the actual user form itself. I used it up there earlier on the close event. Me month view 1, which is the name of the actual calendar itself, dot value equals active cell dot value, and I finish off the if statement with end if. So that checks the active cell. If it's got a date, it then writes that date into the calendar so that the calendar and the active cell both show the same date. Remember, debug, compile and save before we actually test any code. I'll run it from Excel this time. I'll open the macros dialog and run the calendar. And you'll see that the calendar has now opened for November 2014, so not the current date, which is the same as the date in the active cell. Now, unfortunately, I haven't found a way to actually highlight the day number. You're supposed to be able to do it according to Microsoft, and try as I might, I've not been able to do that. I think it's a bug in the calendar, although that is an easy answer, really, isn't it? If you know of a way to do that or find a way to do it, I can do it in other circumstances, but not using the initialize event. So I'm going to have to be satisfied with that as it is. Okay, that's the first thing that I wanted to change. Now, the next thing that I want to do is make it so that there will be a keyboard shortcut built into the calendar, so that the user can give a keyboard shortcut and have the calendar appear, and also an item on the right click menu of a cell. So if the user right clicks on a cell, there'll be an item on this menu that says insert date, and when they click that, the calendar will open. So again, I need to go to the Visual Basic Editor. Now this time, the code to do those jobs is not going to reside actually in the user form itself. It needs to reside in the workbook, because the code will run when the workbook opens. So when the workbook opens, an instruction will be given to Excel that a particular keyboard shortcut will open the calendar, and when the workbook closes, that keyboard shortcut is cancelled, and at the same time, when the workbook opens, a new item will be created on the right click menu of a cell, and when the workbook closes, that item will be removed. The place to put your code is in a special module called the This Workbook module. So you just have to double click to open that particular module, and there are specific event procedures for the workbook opening and the workbook closing. And we'll start off with the workbook open event. So again, drop down the list, choose workbook, and the default event procedure is workbook open, which is the one that I want. So let's start writing the code. Now, as before, I'm going to put in a simple error handler here, on error, resume, next. I'll explain the reason for putting that in just a moment. Now, I do need to declare a variable here, and the variable is going to represent the new menu item. An item on a menu is called a control, dim, and I'm going to call it new control, as command bar control. So I shall be referring to that variable later. And first of all, a bit of code to set a particular keyboard shortcut. In order to do that, you need to talk to Excel, so I'm going to start off with the word application. And there's an event called onKey. OnKey means when a particular combination of keys are pressed, and you have to supply it with a code. It says as string there, so it means I have to put it in quotes, and my code is a plus sign, a caret, and in curly brackets, which are probably called braces, the letter C. And what that code stands for, the plus sign stands for shift, the caret stands for control, and the C in curly brackets represents the key press of the letter C. So in other words, Shift Control C will be my keyboard shortcut. You now have to tell it which procedure you want to run, and my procedure will be the macro that I created that opens the calendar. I'm going to be specific and say module 1 here because that's where it lives. Dot open calendar, which is the full name and address of the macro that I want it to run when that particular keyboard shortcut is given. Now the next thing that I'm going to do might seem a bit strange to you, but I'm actually going to give a command to delete the item that I'm going to put on the right click menu. Let me just write the code for that and then I'll explain why. Again, we're talking to the application, so we start off with application, and we're talking about command bars. A command bar is the term given to menus and it's quite rare now, a toolbar, but there's a specific one that's the right click menu of the cell and it's called cell. Dot controls, so we want to talk about a specific control, and that control is going to be called, I haven't made it yet, but it's going to be called insert date. That's going to be the text of the menu item, and I'm going to say here delete. So why am I deleting something that I haven't made yet? Well, this is a bit of a safety net so that if Excel didn't close properly last time and the code that will delete the item off the menu when the workbook containing calendar closes, because there's no point having it there if the calendar's not available, if that code didn't have the chance to run, maybe because Excel crashed or something happened to it, of course the next time Excel opened this particular workbook, the menu item would already be there and your code would want to add another one, and you might end up with multiple instances of that menu item. We don't want that, so the first command we're giving is telling it to remove that menu item if it's already there. If it's not there, you would normally get an error at that point, which is why I've got on error resume next. So we try to remove it. If we can't, doesn't matter. Now comes the code actually to create that particular control, and this time I'm going to be referring to my variable up there, set new control. So in other words, I'm telling it what new control is, equals application dot command bars open bracket cell dot controls dot add. So I've told it to add a new control to the cell command bar, to the right click menu of the cell. I've not yet told it what that control is or what it does. So I'm going to use a with statement because I want to use several different commands to refer to the same item. With new control, its caption is going to be insert date. Now be very careful about your spelling here. Make sure you spell it and you write it the same way every time you refer to it. On action, in other words, when that item is chosen, what do you want to happen? I'm going to tell it which macro to run, which as you remember is module 1.openCalendar. And finally, I'm asking it to begin a group. That's an optional one, which just says put it at the end of the menu and put a line above it just to begin a new group and separate it. Finally, to finish off this with statement, end with. So all that is going to happen when the workbook opens. As the workbook opens, a new keyboard shortcut is set and a new item gets put on the right click menu of the cell. Now we also want to have some of these commands reversed as the workbook closes. So I'm going to ask for another event procedure, and it's actually called the before close event because it happens just before workbook closes. And this is a fairly simple one. I'm going to have on error resume next again. I want it to cancel the keyboard shortcut command, and the way we do that is take just the first part of the command that we use to create a keyboard shortcut. So I'm actually going to copy that and paste it into there. So that cancels that keyboard shortcut instruction. Next, we want the line of code that deletes the item off the menu. Copy and paste, and that's done. So I'm going to test this code in a moment. So we want to debug, compile and save, but what I also want to do at this point, it's a convenient point to do it, is to password protect my code. That's quite an important thing to do for various reasons. First of all, it protects your intellectual property. If you've created something yourself and you don't want other people to steal your code, then you can password protect the code and users can't see it. Another reason to do that is to stop people interfering with the code. Somebody might think they can improve your code and actually they break it. Or worse, somebody might write some malicious code. So if you password protect your code, it prevents all of those things happening. It's a very easy thing to do. We go to the Tools menu and go to VBA Project Properties. On the Protection tab, we need to write and confirm a password and then lock the project for viewing. Even though you might have entered a password here, it doesn't become effective until you lock the project for viewing, and none of that works until the workbook has been closed and saved and then reopened. So I'm going to OK that. Again, I'm going to save the workbook and then go into Excel and close the workbook. I'm just going to remove that, and now I'll close the workbook. Do I want to save the changes? Yes, I do. And now I'm going to reopen the workbook. It'll be on my recent files list. There it is. Now, depending upon whether or not you've where you've saved your workbook, you might get the warning about security here, but I'm not getting it because I'm putting it in a safe place. Let's have a look and see first of all if the keyboard shortcut works. I'm going to Control-Shift-C, and there's the calendar, and I can write a date into a cell. That's fine. And how about right-clicking on a selection, and there's my Insert Date item. When I choose that, the calendar appears, and I can choose a date. What if I want to go and check out the code here? If I go to my Visual Basic Editor, you'll see it looks slightly different, and if I try to open the Calendars Workbook's code, I'm asked for a password. So I can't get into the code unless I give the password, and now it's allowing me into the code if I want to modify my calendar at all. So at this point I've actually finished building the calendar, and if you want to just keep your calendar in one specific workbook, there you are, you can stop at this point. But if you want to distribute this calendar to other users, what would be a very convenient thing to do, and also a safe thing to do, would be to save it as an add-in. So that instead of distributing a workbook to people, they can install the add-in on their computer, and that will always be available to them in Excel. It's a very easy process. All you have to do is save this workbook as an add-in, which is a specific type of Excel workbook. But before you do that, there's one or two things that are not vital, but it's quite useful to do. First of all, with this workbook open and in this workbook, I'm going to the File tab. Now, if you're working in Office 2007, you just click the Office button up in the corner to get here. And I'm going to the File Properties and choosing Advanced Properties. Another way to do this is actually to close the file, go and find it in wherever you've put it on your computer, right click and choose Properties. You'll get to the same window, and then on the Summary tab, give some information about the file. So I'm going to call this, the title is an important one, pop up calendar, because that will actually become the name of your add-in as opposed to its file name. The author, I'll put my full name in here, and I'll also put my web address, and again, what is quite useful is in the comments section down here, put some information which will describe what your add-in does. So for example, I might give an instruction that says right click on a cell or use the keyboard shortcut Shift, I'm afraid I type quite slowly, Control and C to open the calendar, and the chosen date will be written into the selected cell or cells. Okay, right click on a cell or use the keyboard shortcut Shift Control C to open the calendar. The chosen date will be written into the selected cells. Okay, so I'm happy with that. The name of my add-in is up here and a description here and a little bit about me. I'm going to OK that, take myself back into Excel and save. In other words, I've saved that description. And now to actually make the add-in itself. We do a save as here. Again, in 2007 you press the Office button. I'm going to click the File tab, choose Save As, and the Save As dialog comes up. Now at the moment it's calendar.xlsm and it's a macro enabled workbook. I want to have an Excel add-in, and I've got two choices here, a 97-2003 add-in or an add-in for the current version, which is 2007 or 2010. Now if you save as a 2003 add-in, this code will actually work in Excel 2003, but you must use the new kind of add-in, an Excel AM, if you're working in 2007 or 2010. So I'm choosing that, and it's taken me to the Addins folder, which is a particular place on your C drive. And you can actually save your Addin anywhere you like, but I'm saving it in the default folder. And all I have to do now is click Save. Now it's a save as, so my actual calendar workbook here, the XLSM file, remains unchanged, which is fine. The one thing that you shouldn't really do is open both at the same time. So I'm going to save that in case I need to make any changes to my Addin. So I'm going to close my calendar workbook now. Now, once you've created an Addin, you can distribute that to various users, and they need to go through a short-term installation procedure, and I'll show you how that works. I'm just going to ask for a new empty workbook here, which is not important for the installation, but just so that you can see that if I Control-Shift-C, nothing happens because there isn't a workbook here at the moment which contains the calendar. If I right click on a cell, there's no insert date option there. Now, in order to install the calendar, again, I go to my File tab, or you choose the Office button in 2007, and you go to your Excel options. I'll move the window down here so you can see it. Now, on the Excel options, there is an Addins manager, and here you can see there is my pop-up calendar. It actually calls it pop-up calendar, although its file name is calendar.xlam, because that is the title that I gave it in its properties. And it's here under inactive application Addins, which means it's not available to me yet. Now, Excel has found it because it was put in the default Addins folder. But I'll show you, if you do put it somewhere else, maybe on a network location, it's quite easy to find it. In order to activate it, you come down to the drop down here, make sure that Excel Addins is selected from this list, there are other things on the list, and click Go, and you see the Addins manager here, and again there is the pop-up calendar. These other Addins are ones that are installed along with Excel when you set up Excel on your computer. Now, in order to activate the calendar, I just need to put a tick in the box. That's the description that I wrote, if you remember, in the comments section. And if I click OK, clicking OK actually opens the Addin. You don't get to see it, but it's there in Excel. So if I give my keyboard shortcut, Control-Shift-C, the calendar appears. And similarly, if I right click on a cell, there is Insert Date, and I can choose a date which gets written into all the cells. There you are, job done. If at any point you want to deactivate the calendar, in Excel 2007 you have to go again to the Addins manager via the Excel options, but if you open the developer tab in version 2010, we've got a button here for Addins, and that opens the Addins manager. So to switch it off, you just take the tick away. I'm going to leave it open because it's useful. You'll notice that if you visit the Visual Basic Editor when you've got Addins installed, that you will see them appear here. Now, with third-party Addins, like these other ones from Microsoft, if they were activated, you'd see them here. And most people who build Addins password protect them, so you can't get in. But because you know the password, if you want to modify your Addin, you can do it from here, or you can work on the saved workbook file. there we are. That's the end of this particular tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it, and remember that you can go and read about the whole thing in the tutorial on my website at www.fontstuff.com. You can go step by step through the entire tutorial. It's copiously illustrated with screenshots, and there's even a sample ready-made Addin file for you to download.